watch a lot of movie reviewers on YouTube like I do, you may notice that the term pacing comes up a lot. But for many of you, I'm sure you didn't fully understand what they truly meant by that. We all have some basic understanding of what pacing is in a narrative context. It's the flow, it's the speed at which a story is going, but what does that mean exactly? Well, broadly, pacing is the distance between narrative beats in a story. Now, a narrative beat is not a plot point, even though all plot points are narrative beats, because remember, the plot is just the lens through which the story is told. Narrative beats also include important character moments in which a character makes a realization about themselves and makes an irrevocable decision. For example, in Batman Begins, when Bruce Wayne makes the choice not to kill, this isn't a huge plot point. The only thing it serves is to get Bruce to portray the League of Shadows, which could be done in any number of ways. But as a character choice, it becomes one of the most important narrative beats in the movie, as it's the decision that defines Bruce for the rest of the entire trilogy and informs his character not just in Batman Begins, but also in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. So pacing is about how you space out these narrative beats, and gives us a clue as to what people mean when talking about fast and slow pacing. Fast-paced stories have a lot of narrative beats all placed very close together to keep the story at a high energy, and slow pacing has fewer narrative beats with more distance between them. Now, I want to stress that your narrative beats do not have to be equidistant from each other. Many stories start slow and ramp up the pacing as they go along, and that works. Plenty of good stories use this tactic, and it's effective because as more things happen, the tension is ramped up allowing the story to build to a good climax. So now that we all know what pacing is, we can now answer the age-old question: fast pacing or slow pacing? Well, I know which one Hollywood thinks it's best. Yeah, so most Hollywood blockbusters today have uber fast pacing. This idea was popularized by Mad Max Fury Road. This makes sense, considering it's the best action movie ever made. And it would seem like a good decision. Keeping narrative beats close together and happening all the time keeps the audience alert and allows for more drama and action, since that's where most narrative beats, especially plot points, happen in action movies. This style works especially well in movie franchises that don't really try to be more complex than they are, like the Fast and Furious movies. The problem with fast pacing lies in movies that want to have more complexity in its characters and themes. Case in point, The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker had plenty of flaws, but most of those flaws could have been mediated by many of the good elements that would have resulted in a passable experience. Keyword being would have. One element was holding it back and keeping it in the 4 or 5 out of 10 range for me, and that is The Rise of Skywalker's atrocious pacing. Some of the worst I've seen on film. For instance, The Rise of Skywalker is 2 hours and 42 minutes long. For comparison, The Empire Strikes Back is only 2 hours and 4 minutes long, and yet you would be forgiven not knowing, thinking that Empire was the longer movie. This is due to The Rise of Skywalker's relentlessly fast pacing, a staple in J.J. Abrams movies, but a huge problem if you're trying to flesh out the characters. Take this scene taking place after the narrative beat in which Chewie quote-unquote dies, and Rey was responsible. It's a good scene that subtly shows the similarities between Rey and Kylo and hints that Finn may be Force sensitive, but like this, it cuts because we have to get to the next narrative beat. All this leads to The Rise of Skywalker feeling like a movie that's trying to say a lot, but due to the overwhelmingness of its plot, ends up saying nothing at all, which is why, in my opinion, for character-driven storytelling at least, slow pacing is the GOAT. Let's examine the effectiveness of slow pacing by taking a look at one of the greatest slow-paced movies of all time, Blade Runner 2049. This movie is layered in its characters in a way not seen in many other movies. The main character doesn't even say a lot, but through a few simple actions you know everything about him. 2049 is an extremely slow movie. There's a scene where the main character just sits near a holographic advertisement lamenting the death of his weird fake product girlfriend and the fact that he isn't the chosen one. And I love it. I love how this movie just has scenes where the characters talk and feel their own emotions, and not in a lecturing way, but in a more artistic and realistic way. Now, that isn't to say that slow pacing is always good. The Last Airbender is slow paced, and it's the worst movie ever made, but that's for one reason. Even though you are spacing out the narrative beats further apart, you still have to fill the space in between with something. And Shyamalan didn't, which made the movie feel like nothing was happening. Blade Runner 2049 doesn't have this problem because it knew what to fill its runtime with. Character moments. Whenever a major narrative beat happens, like some kind of character moment or plot point, we always get a moment after the beat showing us the characters are processing the information, and even further, after scenes in which a character has processed the information, just scenes of them chillin', giving even more characterization so we understand their decisions making throughout the rest of the film. It makes the movie way more complex and interesting than it would otherwise be. When Cade goes to save Harrison Ford, we understand why he made this choice. He rejected the resistance movement, but also doesn't want to condemn him to a life of slavery in Jared Leto's torture lab. So when he goes and saves him to bring back his daughter, we're not like, what the hell? We go, he's undergone character development! And it makes the small-scale nature of the climax feel way grander. Overall, this movie gets pacing very right. It never feels boring, but it can take its own time, allowing you to actually get invested in the story rather than just throwing a few explosions in your face and leaving. That's what slow pacing is good at, and it makes me happy that studios are actually starting to realize this. Loki, for instance, doesn't have as much fast-paced action as you would expect from a Marvel show. It's a slow, mundane character study. Like, 80% of it is just characters talking either about themselves or the world around them. When a major narrative beat happens, it actually seems important, and it works. Loki is one of the biggest cultural phenomena put out by the MCU despite its lack of action. I really hope more people understand that slow pacing and boredom are not the same thing, and I hope I communicated that to you guys clearly. But more importantly, I hope I helped you guys understand one of the key aspects of writing a little bit better, so when an annoying movie critique YouTuber talks about pacing in a Marvel movie, you can actually understand what he means. Thank you all for watching, and go subscribe.